everyone, and welcome to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sarah Payne, a health marketing strategist at Umbrella Communications, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. Today's episode is all about blending the best of both worlds, corporate strategy and startup agility. Some of the most successful marketing leaders know that achieving a balance between the structured approach of a large corporation and the nimble, innovative spirit of startups is key. Our guest today has navigated both environments and is here to share her unique perspective on what it takes to succeed in any marketing landscape. We'll explore strategies for maintaining agility and how to foster innovation regardless of your organization's size. Our guest is Heather Cmiel. She's an award-winning marketing and communications professional with a proven track record of driving business results. She currently serves as the Vice President of Brand and Communications at Aidoc, a startup that's revolutionizing healthcare by seamlessly integrating AI to deliver critical insights, exactly when and where they're needed, and more connected for a smarter. And she's no stranger to the health industry. Before joining Aidoc, Heather was a Marcom leader for the Medical Solutions Division at 3M Healthcare. She's also an accredited member of the Public Relations Society of America and past president of the Minnesota chapter of the PRSA. And she holds her master's in communication from Purdue University. I'm thrilled to have you with me on the show today, Heather. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you. I think this is such an important topic. I think a lot of organizations would love to be able to blend sort of the best of both worlds, right? The corporate strategy and the innovation and nimbleness of a startup. Can you start, Heather, by sharing a little bit about your background and your experiences in both of these environments?
Yeah, absolutely. I started on the agency side of the world, actually, which I think gave me a really interesting foundation. You talk about being really nimble. As you know, agency requires that agility. It requires that flexibility. And I think, growing up, if you will, in agency, both small boutique owned agencies, as well as larger global agencies, really gave me the ability to jump and pivot and flex into different areas. The agency world, though, I think can take its toll on people. And I sought a new challenge, which brought me not only into corporate, but into corporate being 3M, right? It's a massive company. When I joined, healthcare was one of their larger divisions, and coming in to that organization was interesting because I definitely had a preconceived notion of corporate walking in. Some of those things were valid and some of those things were definitely challenged. I had a very different perspective going into corporate, going out of corporate. And then that took me to where I am today, which is Aidoc. Walking into a very mature startup. Startups can fluctuate on a lot of different levels. And I was talking to a friend before I took the role at Aidoc, and she was also at a startup, and she was giving me some advice. And she's like, you have to wear a lot of hats, and it's a lot of roll up your sleeves, and that's true. But her startup was 12 people, still in very early funding rounds, whereas Aidoc was very well established with 400 people, Series D funding, and definitely on its way to becoming much more of a mid-size organization.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, right? Because even inside of corporate and inside of startup, there's different degrees of what that means, right? You can be multi-billion-dollar corporation, or a smaller corporation. Same thing to be said of startups as well. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Heather. You mentioned that when you joined the corporate environment, you had some preconceived notions, and some of those things were true, and some of those things you said your perspectives were challenged. What were some of those things that changed or didn't pan out to be true once you were in that environment?
Yeah, I think what was really interesting to me is I definitely had the perception of slow moving, and I had the perception of very bureaucratic. And I think those things are true, but I think it also depends who's driving the bus. And when I joined corporate very early on, when someone told me I couldn't do something, I would ask 3 different questions. Number one, was this an FDA rule, right? If this is an FDA sort of territory, we're going to be more cognizant of it. Is this a legal concern? Is this about risk mitigation for the company? If so, that means there could be some latitude. I've worked with really great legal and regulatory teams who have a philosophy of guardrails, not roadblocks. And so, when they're bringing up opposition, maybe there's workarounds and ways to adjust. Or is this just someone's opinion? And I think the one thing you do find in corporate is a lot of tenured individuals who've been there a long time who are like, this is how we do it. And so I knew walking in that there would be some of that. I think what surprised me is how much of an appetite there was for change, how much of an appetite there was for speed and different thinking. I walked into a really gray, undefined role, and I got to shape it and I got to build it. And I think that luxury enabled me to change the way things were done. I also think while you're working in a gigantic organization, there are a lot of parallels to working like on an agency team, right? At one point I worked for Weber Shandwick. It's a huge organization, but I worked with the same people on account teams day in and day out. And corporations not that different. I worked with very similar team members day to day. We formed really incredible bonds, built a really awesome culture, but you have the ability to tap into these other resources as needed, which was very evident when I was leading some work during COVID, and how important that having those levers to pull can ultimately really be.
I really love the point you made, Heather, about in particular, the 3 questions that you asked when you came into a larger corporation, right? I think that's fantastic advice that others can apply as well. What other lessons did you learn that you believe would be beneficial for other marketing leaders?
I think particularly when navigating a larger organization, there's a lot of truth to what's in your job jar. I was taught that by a great partner I worked with at 3M, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think a lot of times, particularly in the absence of clear roles and responsibilities, you can run into a situation where everybody's overstepping. Overstepping creates territory grabs. Overstepping can create a lot of chaos. And so what's in your lane, and how do you also work with people to continue to steer them into their lanes? Because I think where slowdowns happen and bureaucracy happens is everybody's overstepping. And right, I would never walk into the lab and say, hand me some beakers, let's do some science. That is a skill. That is a learned skill that professionals hone and craft for many, many years. It's the same with the communications discipline, but it's not always given the same respect, right? Because we're all writing, we're all communicating, we're talking in meetings, but communications is a learned skill. There's science behind communications. And so I often found, particularly in my function, a lot of overstepping because everybody communicates. So everybody has opinions in regard to that world. Also with marketing, I think there's a lot of parallels. But I think steering people into their subject matter expertise can help really navigate some choppy waters.
Yeah, amen to that. I mean, I'm sure so many listeners can relate to this. Everybody thinks they're good at marketing, right? Everybody has an opinion about marketing. Everybody thinks they're a good writer. We all know that that's not necessarily true, right? What we do,
we're all consumers of marketing, right? Like that's part of it. We're all consumers 100%. Of it. And we have opinions on what works and what doesn't. We are farther removed from things like science. Like we might be consumers of the science, but we don't have that direct connection as much as we do to being consumers of marketing, because we're seeing it every day in everything that we touch.
So after spending a few years at 3M and then moving on to more of a startup environment, what do you see as, how can marketing leaders really leverage the strengths of both of those environments in terms of driving their marketing strategies and achieving marketing success?
Yeah, I think the point of innovation is something both the previous organization I was at and where I'm at today are things they do really well. And I think a huge lesson I have learned over my career is innovation can come from anywhere. And so you need to be open to thinking, and you need to be open to perspectives and opinions, and I think it goes across all different types of disciplines. When you're creating something, right, you as a marketer might not be in the lab, but you understand what the market is doing and what the market cares about and what the market is communicating. And so those types of things become really important in discussions. I also think you have to be unafraid to speak up. I,
Mm,
I think a lot of times marketers, when they're in a room with lots of different subject matter experts, sometimes don't necessarily bring a strong voice because they're the marketer, right? Like they're once the product's been innovated, once everything's been figured out, once the pricing's been set, like then they come in and they bring the story to life. But I think being in at the ground level is so important. I remember when I first joined 3M, it was really interesting to me because I came from the agency world, right? And I heard a perspective that agencies were a waste of time and money. And I found that to be really interesting. And I said, unpack that for me a bit more. And what I came to learn was the agency wasn't delivering because they didn't have the access to the information that they needed. Right. If
mm.
they were in the midst of creating creative for a launch. And I said, did they talk to the scientists? Did they get in on the VOC? Did they dive into all the ins and outs of how this product came to be? Well, why would they need that? Well, they need the full story to understand why this exists. What problem are we ultimately selling that we solve? And so, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is ask questions, raise your voice, and collaborate with people across the organization. Some of the best partnerships I had were not with the product marketers at 3M, it was with the scientists. It was with the technical service people who were ultimately clinicians that were training at the bedside. At Aidoc, it's very similar. I have very close partnerships with my marketing peers, but I'm also forging relationships with our innovation. We have an AI innovation team, and they're going in and educating about just the ever-changing landscape of AI. We have a workflow transformation team. They are standing at the bedside showing clinicians how to bring AI into their workflows. Like this is where a lot of the information sits and resides. And I think those things become so important to the work that we do. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas, and I teach a master's class about reputation management and brand strategy. But the class is really tailored to MBAs. And so a lot of times in that class are not marketers. It is R&D leaders, it is financial leaders, it is sales leaders. And we talk a lot about storytelling. And it's so interesting to me about how many of them think they don't play a role in storytelling because they're not in the marketing function, they're not in the comms function, but they are the door opener to all the information. And so this is where I look to our marketing teams and our communication teams about how are you opening those doors to all those other functions to help build stories, build effective marketing campaigns, and build things that will actually motivate audiences.
This is such a profound point, Heather, because I think you touch on something that transcends even the topic that we're focused on today, right? Like I think the most successful brands, the most successful narratives, the most successful marketing leaders are those that can get closest to the narrative, to the story,
Mm-hmm.
right? To your point, it's the bedside, right? It is
Yep.
who's interacting with the customer. What is that experience like? Why is this important? And what is their perspective on the world? What problems are we helping solve? And how do people actually talk about that in real terms in a way that they
Mm-hmm.
can understand? And I think that's such a profound point because it not only leads to success for marketing leaders like yourself, but for your team members and also for your agency partners, right?
Yep.
Everybody can be better at their jobs in their roles within marketing when they can get closest to that. And so I think that's such an important point for anybody
And it
listening out there.
it
Go
breaks
ahead.
down the walls, right? Like it breaks down the walls, it breaks down these connections. When you talk about bureaucratic, slow moving organizations, part of it is because those partnerships have not been formed. Those relationships have not been fostered inside an organization. And those things are hard, right? Because those things can take time to build, but once you have them established, and then you have the rules of the road of who owns decision rights for specific things, then things move quickly because you've laid this foundation, and it benefits internal and it benefits the work product that you're trying to deliver on.
Absolutely. You brought up the term bureaucratic, and I wanted to go there. Labels like that often become excuses
Mhm.
right? And
100%.
and what's your take on that? How can leaders inside of these supposedly bureaucratic organizations really sort of break free from that mindset? And you've already shared some, fantastic advice and lessons that you've learned. Anything else in terms of not letting a label like bureaucratic hold us back?
Yeah, I think those labels become excuses. Now, granted, there's going to be certain things that are just going to move slower, particularly when you're talking about medical technologies that are impacting people's lives. And you do have to challenge and you do have to make sure that things are thought through and that there's not vulnerabilities because of who the end consumer, the ultimate consumer is of these technologies and these solutions. But I think a lot of times I was told early in my career I wouldn't fit in corporate. I found that really fascinating because I was a risk taker. I challenged convention. I was outspoken. I asked questions, and I was told those things are not like that doesn't fit the corporate mold. And I found that when I walked in 3M to not be accurate at all. Like I was embraced for who I was. I was asked for my opinions. I was hired for a specific reason. I was reminded of that reason every single day of why I was hired. And I think a lot of these labels that companies get are because you don't, I think it comes back to individuals that aren't willing to push or that aren't willing to challenge or that aren't willing to fight for what's right. It is tiring. It is exhausting to push. It is exhausting to build relationships, but it also is so important. And so, I think it all comes down to individuals
Yeah,
ultimately.
absolutely. And boy, you sure proved them wrong too, didn't you?
I
Yeah.
uh I had a wild time at 3M. It was such a fulfilling part of my career. Like, I always joked I'd never go to 3M because my father was a 3Mer for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I said, no, never gonna go to 3M. And he found it real interesting that I went there. And it was I learned so much about business strategy working at that company, so much about innovation, and so much about collaboration. Because in the agency, you're surrounded by like-minded people, meaning you all get what you do, right? We all
Right, right.
understand the challenges of marketing. We understand the challenges of communication. We understand brand. Even if we have different opinions of how we come at it, we have a lot of empathy for each other because we get each other's worlds. You walk into a corporation and you are now surrounded by so much different expertise, which is amazing. It is amazing. And it really taught me a lot about honing and building a story and the importance of how you guide your agency partners and the importance of the role that you play inside an organization and that bridge and that connector.
Well, maybe, Heather, it's true that more large corporations need to look for need to look for more people that come from a slightly different background, from an agency perspective, that have more of that, risk-taking approach. Let's talk a little bit, Heather, about resource allocation. Corporations might have more resources, but what's your experience in terms of being able to do some pretty amazing things
Mhm.
regardless of the size of the organization that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got a budget, right? I think there is definitely an assumption when I was at 3M that, well, you work for this Fortune 250 company, you must have really, really deep pockets. That was not always the case. I think organizations are getting smarter in what they invest in. I think they're getting smarter in investments externally as well as investments from an internal perspective. It has been amazing to me what we have been able to do at Aidoc with a very small team of extremely talented individuals. We have an in-house designer, and we partner with more of a production design type organization that basically expands our design capabilities threefold. But it is amazing. I mean, last year my team of there's 6 of us, including myself, we produced 285 pieces of content
Wow.
last year. And all of it was based on a strategy and a plan, and also thinking about how do we squeeze as much juice out of everything that we create as possible. Because we're sitting in a world for my world today that is really complicated. AI is the word of the moment, and it is so extremely complicated. And everybody's saying they do AI. Organizations are getting pressured to bring on AI strategies, but not understanding like, how do we do that? How do we discern different types of AI? So education becomes a really important focus for us as an organization and us as a subject matter expert. And so when I think about how do we do more with less, I'm looking at what skills do I have on my team? How do I make sure that those skills are the work that we're doing are aligned to those specific experts? And how do we put a plan in place that we work against? And we don't ever create anything for a single use, because I think
Yes.
that's where organizations fall down, is like, you create it, you put it out there, you throw it away. Everything we use is squeezed as much as possible because it just helps with consistency of message. It helps make us a lot more efficient from a organizational standpoint. It enables us to produce faster because we're working off existing bases of things. And it helps us stretch our budget in ways that are more strategic. Like in previous roles, my budget was more used to expand capacity. I've created more of a team inside this organization that is really about creating. So I am, and I think organizations, I'm seeing this kind of as a trend. I don't know if you're seeing this from a hiring standpoint. There is a desire to hire more people who can think and do simultaneously.
Yes.
Not just think, not just do, but being able to blend both of those skills together. And I have a pretty robust team of thinkers and doers. And I think that enables us to maximize output as much as possible.
Yeah. Wow. You guys have achieved some pretty impressive things there for sure. And you talked about, not doing anything solo, one and done. I that's a strategy rather that just needs to die,
Yeah,
right? Like anybody
100%.
out there who's doing the one and done and not repurposing and maximizing the most out of your content, you need to rethink your marketing strategy, right?
100%. And I'm super lucky to have a marketing leader who gives me a lot of autonomy, pushes me in the right ways, and really helps kind of steer organizationally what we're trying to do. And she also is helping connect a lot of dots across the organization to make sure that there's more collaboration happening, because how nobody's got the time to just do something in a vacuum for a one-time use,
Yeah.
right? Like that's not effective for anybody. You need to be maximizing your outputs as much as possible.
Let's talk about speed and agility. I mean, I think I have to imagine one of the things that you're fortunate to have where you're at is an ability to move relatively quick, right? You've got a
Yeah.
tight team of really talented people. You can move things pretty quickly. You've probably got the right understanding of what buy-in you need in order to move. What was your experience with that? This agility, this nimbleness and speed marketing, today with social media and other things, so much of it is very much real time, right? A trend happens that
Yeah.
you as a brand need to be commenting on, and it's a blink of an eye. You either jump on it or you miss that opportunity. How did you sort of deal with that or manage against that inside of an organization that maybe moved a bit slower?
Yeah, it's I mean, I will say the pace as big corporate versus the pace I'm working at now. Like I thought I produced a lot in big corporate. It is insane to me how much is happening within my current environment. And I attribute it back to a couple different things. I attribute it back to decision rights, right? It's one thing I will seek opinions and perspectives, but I'm also like, and we're done now. Like we need to just make a decision and move on, right? And that's
Yes.
hard. That is hard to do with leaders. It is very hard to do. But establishing decision rights when I'm asking someone to review something, putting them in a very specific lane. Hey, I'd like you to review for ABC. This is where I need your expertise, is on ABC. I also do think I will be the first to admit I am not the best at process, but process can be very advantageous in certain regards, right? We work in a
Sure.
regulated industry. I have to make sure that regulatory gets their eyes on things, that we're protecting the company when we're using certain things. But like, how do we put specific processes in place? A group of messages that we can always work from? How do we build claim sheets so we're aligned on information and data? How do we make sure that it's we've aligned on everything in the upfront when these things are being created to expedite things on the back end? Like, how do we operate in a no surprises mentality? I think all of those things definitely help in driving speed and efficiency. But I also think you have to push. Like, you have to push.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm not good at like sitting back and just like waiting for things to happen. And I don't think you can in a startup. Like, I think the reason people go to smaller organizations is to have the opportunity to build, to shape something, to create. It's no secret if you've paid attention to the external media environment with 3M, it's gone through a lot of changes. A
Yeah.
lot of changes. And I found that those changes definitely stymie the ability to move, the ability to create, the ability to move, to build things. And that's a huge reason I wanted to transition, is because I missed that. I missed shaping something, taking that piece of clay and actually shaping something with a team. And but it's definitely hard work, right? It requires hunting people down, having
Yes.
conversations. It requires you saying no to possibly your CEO and putting a rationale like, I don't agree with this and this is why. And building those respected relationships are so important. Again, going back to a strong leader, my CMO is amazing. She has an phenomenal relationship with our CEO. And when I need her to come in and help me out, she is there and ready to have a conversation so we can get unstuck and just move forward.
I love that. And, obviously it takes the two of you sort of understanding those dynamics and you knowing when to pull her in, right, for that. Two really great pieces of advice you offered in what you said there. One is, don't be afraid to push, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to push back on the organization. Don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to push to get what you need to be successful. And the other one was process, which I think is really great. Process can be a 4-letter word, right? But it sounds like you have sort of perfected, having come from and spent time in both environments, really sort of perfected what is the right level of process, not process for the sake of process or, creating 30 unnecessary steps to get something done, but needing to have process to actually help things move. Right.
Yes.
So that the organization, to the benefit of, it benefits your team and your department to see things through, to see things get done, because the organization has agreed, yes, we will, we'll follow this process to get these things done.
Yeah, the process piece is huge. And it's one, you're absolutely right. Like, I came from an over-processed organization to an organization that was not necessarily as process oriented. We have to find some sort of happy medium, particularly as we scale, right? The marketing organization, when I walked in here, was very small. I mean, my team at the time was 2 people.
Wow.
And, we've continued to scale up in between our marketers. And then we have a sales development organization that sits under marketing. I mean, our marketing organization's 40 plus people. That's a lot of growth. And I've only been at Aidoc 2 years. And the scale is amazing. But with scale comes more complexity, right? With more people, it becomes more challenging, which is why these processes can help manage some of that swirl and some of that crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Heather, I'd like to switch gears here for a quick fire before we conclude the episode today. I've got 4 questions for you. First one, we've got to talk about AI. You're at an AI company. We've got to talk about it. So give listeners a couple of quick examples of valuable ways that you're tapping into generative AI in your day-to-day work within your marketing team today.
I think it's so fascinating to navigate this AI world and watch sort of the perspectives and opinions of people, particularly in the communications and marketing realm around AI. I think it is generative AI it's tremendously helpful if used in the right ways. I have observed things where people use Chat GPT and they cut and paste and they think that's done. Right. I work 100% remote. I find Chat GPT to be an amazing brainstorm partner to me.
Yes.
To like think things through, help me reframe things. Like, just be an idea engine to just like get my brain working in a different way. I think you have to use it as a partner. Like, right, when we talk about our company, we're about aiding physicians with AI. We are not about replacing physicians with AI. And I
Right.
think you have to think about it in the same sort of regard. Like, AI is not leaving. I think it will, though, quickly remove marketers and communicators who are not willing to use it, because it can increase your capacity to create. It can help you think of things that you weren't considering. It can be a brainstorming engine. Where things get really dangerous is how if you're starting to cut and paste and you're starting to
Yes.
just like take and lift those things. And I know there's a lot of discussions right now around copyright and who owns what. And so you have to be really cognizant and aware, but I think it can be a tremendously powerful tool if you're using it in a thinking, brainstorming capacity.
Absolutely. I agree with you on all fronts. What's more important to you, Heather, short-term results or long-term investment in the brand?
Oh, that's such a tricky one.
I know, trick question.
For me, where we're at right now is long-term investment in the brand, because I feel like it's other teams' responsibilities to produce short-term results and really build that pipeline. For me, brand investment, though, right? Building that brand, it takes a bit, but once you have that established brand, it can accelerate things even faster. But brand building is a long tail strategy, and it is a strategy that is not for the faint of heart and does not happen overnight and requires resilience and discipline, but I think it pays off in spades in the long run.
Yes, I agree with you so much. Brand leaders unite, right? It's the
Yep.
long-term investment in the brand, definitely needed.
And it's not
Um,
just your logo,
correct.
which is so many people think.
How do you stay current, Heather, on trends in your own professional development? Do you have some go-to resources that you turn to help you stay current?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a consumer of information, so I think though LinkedIn can sometimes be a little bit like high school, virtual high school, I do think there's a lot of information you can still find. I'm an avid subscriber of the Harvard Business Review. I think the Harvard Business Review gives great purviews into marketing and into business strategy. I also am very fortunate to be surrounded by lots of amazing professionals who I can think with, can go out for a beverage with, and have conversations. I mean, I remember when I joined 3M, I did a lot of that. A lot of, is this normal? Has this happened to you? Because I had friends that worked at big major companies in the Twin Cities, and it was helpful to just like
Yeah.
have sounding boards.
Yeah. To feel seen and heard
Yeah.
and learn
And
from
to like
other
pressure
people.
test stuff. Like, am I
Yes.
coming at this wrong? Should I be thinking about this differently?
Yeah, I love that. I love that sort of embracing that always learning. And I mean, that's really sort of how we landed on the title for this podcast series as well. The collective is I think
Mhm.
we're all in this together and we can share a lot of wisdom from, being in the trenches and all the different experiences that we've all had. Last question, what's the best podcast episode or book on either leadership or marketing that you've consumed recently?
I really like Todd Henry, and he has a podcast called The Daily Creative. And they're
Ooh,
really short episodes, but he talks about how do you continue to be a creative engine in your organization, and ways to sort of unleash creative strategy, because creativity can become really stymied, really flat. It can be really hard and exhausting to always be the creative one in an
mm,
organization. I mean, I think creativity sits everywhere, but I think often marketing and communications people are looked at being the creative engine. And so that's a really helpful podcast in just understanding like how you can unleash creativity. A lot of the things that he's done have been fantastic, and just how to just create and hone a more creative muscle in your brain.
love that. I actually haven't listened to that one, so I'm definitely going to flag this and check that out because you're right. Creativity is so important in everything that we do today.
I also think it's important to not always consume marketing and
Yes.
communication, because I think creativity can come from all sorts of places. I'm a big listener to Smartless. I think Smartless is just such a fascinating journey that has started. But listening to all of these different people who live in the creative arts world and sort of where they find inspiration, how they think. I mean, I think you can find ideas anywhere. And I think it's really important too to find things that kind of light your fire and enable you to feel a connection and drive inspiration.
And there are people in this world that are just born storytellers, right? And I think looking at a series like Smartless is a great example to surround yourself and listen to how people tell stories, right? And are fascinating is just incredibly valuable for those of us who are in marketing and tell stories for brands, because you want your content to attract people emotionally, right? And I think that we can find great storytellers from all different industries.
Yeah. I mean, right. Look at the absolute huge consumption of murder mystery podcasts. Like there's a reason those are so highly consumed. It's a great story. Like ultimately, that is what we're trying to do. I firmly believe we're more effective when we don't try to sell stuff. We actually just try to tell stories. And I mean, I think if you looked at the similarities between effective marketing and murder mystery podcasts, you're going to find a lot of parallels in how
you might be onto something there. That you might have just coined your first book, Heather. It might be how to create a cliffhanger brand. I don't know. Maybe that's already a book out there, but you can thank me later for that one. Well, Heather, this was really fun. I feel like we could go on all day. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. Really appreciate the conversation.
How can listeners get in touch with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. I also have, if you live in Minnesota and like restaurants on the east side of the city, I have a very nerdy hobby of talking about the East Metro restaurants. So you can find me on East Side Eats MN as well if you want food content. But LinkedIn's always the best way if you want to talk.
I love that. Be sure to check that out. Heather's a foodie. She's, especially if you live in the Twin Cities, she's got a lot of great restaurant recommendations. So be sure to follow Heather on LinkedIn and check out her foodie content as well. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.